Hello, this is John with Basin Safety Consulting and Training. This month, June 2021, we're going to be covering accident and incident reporting and hearing protection. So two pretty short topics combined into a medium-length safety training course. Glad you're here with us this month. We'll go ahead and get started. So we're going to jump right into accident and incident reporting requirements. They can vary from company to company as far as when an accident is supposed to be reported, not just to your supervisor, but also to the customer that you're working for, as well as who you're supposed to call. And so those are things you definitely want to make sure you know for your company. Typically, most of you have some sort of occupational doctor that you work with, whether it's a clinic or one of those 24-hour kind of triage companies. And I'm going to give you the number of R's just in case in the quiz, just in case you ever need it. You can use that number, put it in your phone, and worst case scenario, they bill it to us. The guy gets taken care of. Doesn't matter. We just want to make sure that everyone gets taken care of. So each company is going to have specific requirements, as well as action items, contact information, timing requirements, and then what needs to get reported. Those are all going to vary by company. So you want to check. I've included an example of one of our incident kind of record forms of all the different documents that we request when we go to do an investigation. Make sure you know your company's requirements, what they look like, what's all involved. Then there are OSHA requirements, which are the same for everybody. So if there's a hospitalization, for example, you need to let them know within a day, 24 hours period. And they're pretty stickler on this. Failure to do that will definitely spark a more in-depth investigation if that timeline isn't met. And then also if there's fatality within 8 hours. Now in that case, there's definitely going to be an investigation, but definitely within 8 hours, you want to let them know and stay in compliance with those guys. And then there's the best practices. So when you're doing your initial investigation, this isn't just calling the supervisor, hey, he hurt his knee or tweaked his back, something of that nature. But really, when you're doing the initial investigation, filling out a witness statement, you want to focus in on the 5 whys or 5 W's or whys, depending on how you look at it, which is the who, what, where, when, and why. And with each of these items, you can actually drill it down. Like, for example, Johnny fell off the back of a pickup truck. Why did he fall off the back of a pickup truck? He was up there, removing a generator. Why was he up there removing the generator? They needed to plug in the welder. Why did they need to plug in the welder? Because there was no power on location, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in an instance like that, we can say, well, maybe this location needs standard power, so we don't have to be getting in and out of pickup trucks. Or can we have a welder with a generator mounted on it, for example, if the welder isn't a generator itself, which oftentimes it is. But bear with me for the example. You kind of follow down and understand why. And then what else was going on? Why? Why did he lose his footing? Well, because it was icy. Well, why was it icy? Well, we didn't, clear the ice, or it rained the night before and then froze. And, there may be some things that we can determine we can fix in the future and other things we can't. We had an incident this year where somebody slipped on the ice on a rig and actually slipped and put their hand into something that got caught, and they ended up losing the tip of their finger. Now, during this process, their specific process, a lot of water gets dumped onto the rig, about 40 gallons every 5 minutes or so, and that's just part of the process. It's fresh water, but removing ice from the equation completely is near impossible, because even with some elevated work platforms, 40 gallons every 5 minutes, there's going to be some residual ice. So sometimes it's something we can prevent. Could we have put a tonneau cover, a tarp, park the truck inside so it didn't get rained on, etc. Sometimes there's things we can do. Other times it's just part of the game. And then also, as I mentioned, the who, what, where, when, why. Like, obviously, when you're doing your statement, Billy fell in the back of the pickup truck yesterday at 1 p.m. because it was icy. Whatever the reasons are, we want to kind of ensure that when we're filling out these reports and the witness statements that we're getting all that information. And I'll go into witness statements a little bit more here in a bit. So the first step in accident, in reporting an investigation, is prevention. We want to do everything we can to prevent an accident from happening in the first place. Now, hazard analysis is a part of this, but there's one statement, and you've probably heard me say this before, that I really want you to put deep down into your soul, and this is worst case scenario. When you go to do any job, hanging Christmas tree lights on your house, helping your daughter put together a swing set in the backyard, removing a welder from the back of a pickup truck, whatever you're doing, you want to think of
What is the worst case scenario? I could fall, I could trip, this thing could drop and break that. We could slip off the road. I could damage this tool or this piece of equipment or this instrument. You want to think of the worst case scenario. Start there and work your way back into determining what steps can lead to that. Because typically when there's an accident that happens, some people like to call it a failure chain. Murphy's Law, if and anything can happen, it will happen, however you want to look at it. But there are steps, there's things that link to each other that eventually cause the accident. So we want to get in between those instances and prevent it from happening in the first place. Johnny doesn't go in the back of the pickup truck. Johnny can't fall out of the back of the pickup truck, for example. So hazard analysis. Looking at your work site, are there slip, trip, and fall hazards, which is one of the most common accidents in oil and gas and energy? Are there things in our path? As I'm walking, am I looking at my phone? If you watch YouTube or Reels on Instagram or anything like that, I'm sure you've seen a video or two of someone biking or driving and texting on their phone and just slam into the back of something. It happens pretty often, and people even catch it on camera. The tools, do we have the right tools for the equipment or for the jobs? Is the equipment and tools we're using in adequate condition to do the job? That's a huge thing we run into in accidents and incidences where, the hydraulic lines were kind of failing beforehand. We knew they weren't pressurized right, so there was a lot of give from the controls to the actual implement, and an incident happened. Are there things above us, power lines? Are there tools that could be dropped on top of us? I met a guy this last week, actually. He had kind of a dead arm, and it was very obvious, and he was a little bit self-conscious about it. And I asked him what happened, and he was actually on a workover rig, and the SRL, which ironically is something designed to protect people, was not clipped appropriately at the top of the rig, fell, hit him in the shoulder, and he lost the use of his arm for the rest of his life. Now, there may have been an angel with him that day, because if it would have been 6 inches to the left, he would no longer be with us. But fortunately, it did just hit his arm. Unfortunately, he can't work anymore in the way that he used to. Equipment and vehicles, again, equipment that's failing, vehicles that aren't working properly, tires that are bald, not inflated properly. Mechanical equipment, is it working properly? Is it guarded? Or pressurized equipment, are there some double, block or double blind methods being used? Like, so if one valve fails, it doesn't, send gas to where we're welding, et cetera. Are there some safety mechanisms put in place? And then lastly, energized or powered equipment. What things at your workplace exist that could potentially cause a worst case scenario? And, I'm not saying we think like, oh, aliens, I've been listening to a lot of Elon Musk, Joe Rogan podcasts. Aliens could come down, decimate the population, so that's our worst case scenario. Let's start there. I'm not saying get out of control, but when it comes to like, hey, this is a realistic possibility. Now, you may have every control in the book in place to prevent that thing from happening, then document it, and if something's a consistent prevention, it may need to go into an SOP rather than something like a JSA. But again, and this isn't about accident prevention, but this is the first step. So I just really wanted to delve into that pretty deeply. So definitely when you're out there working and thinking about your job and what could go wrong, think of the worst possible case scenario and work your way back from there. So what can fail? There's different stages to a job. You're mobbing to the job. You're on site. You're doing your JSA. You're preparing for work. You're setting up. You're putting things out where they need to go while you're doing the work. Once you're finishing up the work, and then also when you're cleaning up, and then demobbing back to the shop. Obviously, during mobilization or demobilization, we have a lot of similar hazards. Driving, for example, driving tired, driving being distracted, driving on poor conditioned roads, construction. Things can go wrong. Prior to work, while you're doing the job, all these different steps we want to think about, not just, what can happen wrong regarding safety, but also operationally. Like if the truck doesn't come when it's supposed to come, we're going to be 2 hours behind, right? So we want to make sure that thing's on its way. Or if this tool's broken, then we can't do the job today. We drove all the way out here for nothing. And now that's happened to me. Sure, it's happened to you before. It's frustrating, but there's also a risk to it. That means you have to take 2 trips to the same site, kind of doubling your risk. You may not have the right people there the next time if there's someone's on vacation. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, not just from a safety perspective. Obviously, the JSA is designed for that, but once again, I'm encouraging you to go a little bit deeper and not just think about what safety problems can happen, but also what operation problems can happen. So, if an accident occurs, now we're getting to that. It's all preventative that we went through a moment ago. Now we're going to be getting into an actual accident. So, an accident happens. What do we do now? Let's say it's you and one other person. You're the only guy that can really manage this because this person's unconscious, for example. So, we got to assess the severity. How hard was he hit in the head? Is he bleeding? Is he throwing up? Is he having a seizure? And these things sound pretty dark, but they, happen. And what do we know? What can we do? What are the appropriate steps at that time? So the first thing you want to do is obviously prevent it from happening again. If it's, he opened up a valve and the bull plug popped off and hit him and he's down for the count, close the valve before you start moving forward. There shouldn't be more gas coming out at us. You got to close that valve. So obviously preventing, essentially they call it, scene safety, prioritizing, making sure nothing worse is going to happen or no one else is going to get hurt. So that's number 1. Number 2, if qualified, perform medical care. Now, you may be an EMT. You may have just had a CPR first aid class. You may have had no training. There is something called the Good Samaritan law. So if you help and maybe you moved him the wrong way and he broke a rib, he can't come to sue you and say, my right, rib was broken because of you and, I'm going to take your house. It doesn't work that way. So, but you definitely don't want to be like, hey, Billy got hit in the head with a bull plug. I happen to have a scalpel in my tool bag over there. We're going to, cut him open and see what we can do. That's probably definitely going to get you into some trouble. So obviously within the proper scope. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to provide you with a phone number that you can call for triage. So in a lot of cases, if you have reception, you can even video chat with these guys and kind of show them what's going on, and they can walk you through the proper steps. And then obviously contact appropriate personnel, 911 if that's necessary, the supervisor, etc., after the person's kind of been taken care of. So property damage, not necessarily personal injury, but property damage. There's 4 different levels we typically talk about in safety: minimal or minor. Basically, dented the handle of the tool. We got a ding in the windshield from a truck driving by. We'd consider those minor. Major, this is a failure to equipment, work stopped, postponed, or delayed, and potential for minor injury. So this may have just been a near miss to a person, but an incident to property. And we'd consider that a major if it stops the work. Serious is a fire, explosion, potential for serious injury, for example. Things that, get in there or somebody, could really been hurt, not just a twisted ankle or a, hurt finger, but really a serious injury. And then catastrophic is something anything over $500,000 in damage, we consider catastrophic. Loss of well control would be catastrophic, property damage or incident, and then also loss of control of equipment, power, we lost control of it. It's kind of doing its thing. We got to figure out a different way to shut it down, etc. These would all be different levels of severity. So not super important on the front end of an incident, but once again, assessing the severity, like, hey, we got a minor problem here, something we can handle ourselves, or we got something catastrophic, like calling the cavalry, we're in trouble. Injuries. So assessing the severity of injuries. I mentioned earlier, an example of somebody getting hit by a pressurized bull plug. That may be a first aid if it just glances off his ankle, maybe something more serious if it hits him in the head, etc. So we have a first aid level, which does not require medical attention. Bruising, sprain, Band-Aid required, something of that nature, then that would be our first aid. Minor non-recordable. That's something that requires medical attention, but the doctor sees them and says, hey, you know what, take some Tylenol, you'll be okay. A serious and potentially recordable: stitches, broken tooth, a broken bone, if there's work restrictions, and any medication that's prescribed, that all falls into the serious and potentially recordable. And then major or catastrophic. This is a hospitalization with work restrictions, work prevention, or obviously fatality falls into the major, catastrophic as well. So each level, you definitely want to communicate that as soon as possible to 911, EMS personnel, supervisor, safety people, etc. So emergency response steps are going to change per company, right? This is our kind of basic one. You can screenshot this, or some of you may already have a version of this in your wallet. So what do you do if there's an emergency? Move upwind, crosswind. Go to the muster point, ensure everyone's away from danger, do not attempt rescue unless qualified to do so, make sure areas are secure before providing care. So this is just a reminder. Like, I recognize in an accident situation, it's going to be difficult to be like, hey, before I do anything, I'm going to look in my wallet and read this card. That is true. That would be not necessarily your first thought, but having this available to you, you don't want to miss a step or forget something. So it's not a bad idea to have this available. Save it to you can take a screenshot here, save it on your phone, save it in your photos, put it in an album, a safety album. If you like books or PDF saver, put it in there so you have a quick access to it. And then, here I've kind of blocked out the numbers here, but just some, have people's names in there. Not a bad idea. You can even write this yourself, take a picture of it, etc. Occupational medical centers such as Extreme MD, Landmark Medical, Trinity, walk-in clinic. There's a bunch of different companies out there. You should have some contact information for them, 911, a supervisor, police, and then lastly, media. We don't let the media know what's going on, but also, you don't want to call the media and be like, hey, we had an accident out here on the LE, Studebaker. You don't want to do that. But if they do happen to show up, then also you want to contact whoever's responsible for your, managing the press, which is typically a president or, kind of higher level executive. You don't want to be the guy in the air, standing in front of a fire saying, oh man, it was crazy. There was pop coming out of the hole and car, vehicles are blowing up. You don't want to be that guy. I promise you. So reporting time, what's the proper, reporting period? I already said 8 hours for a fatality, 24 hours for a hospitalization. Usually, no matter what, you want to report an incident, accident, or near miss during that work shift. If you tweak your back and you don't say anything to anybody, go home, come back the next day and say, hey boss, yesterday I was lifting that, toolbox there into the truck and my back hurts now. I got to go see a doctor. He's going to be like, I don't know, man, maybe you did that at home, installing your kid's swing set. I have no idea when you did that. So you want to do it the same day. If medical's attention necessary, obviously you want to get that checked out that same day. Regardless of the type of injury, and customers typically want to know that within 24 hours. This can be a little bit scary because you're like, man, if I tell the customer this, will we lose work? Will we have a bad record with them, etc. I promise you, reporting these things in a timely manner versus getting caught for having not reported them will yield much, much less results. Now, my best advice in these scenarios is assess the risk before you go to do jobs. Every day, think of the worst case scenarios and everything you can do to prevent it so you're not in that situation. But if you find yourself in that situation, you definitely want to report it right away. Typically, the customer wants to kind of know who, what, where, when, sometimes why within the first day. Sometimes, they don't expect that why, and I don't expect it as a safety person. I, typically give a few days to a week, depending on how big of a deal it was. But then final report is usually, about 7 days out. That's when we know the why and what we can do to prevent it from happening in the future. So the purpose and importance, obviously, in emergency situations, especially, timing is everything. You want to make that call right away. If someone's losing blood, within a very short period of time, 30 minutes, even if it's only 15 milliliters of blood per minute, they'll be dead in 30 minutes. If the heart stops, you have about 6 minutes until someone passes away without CPR or an AED. Internal bleeding, someone can die within 6 hours. So, for example, let's say someone gets hit pretty good, in near a vital organ. They got some internal bleeding. They may feel a little woozy and not very good. And they'll be like, I'm fine. I'll just, I'll get it checked out tomorrow. Well, they may not have till tomorrow. So that's why if someone gets hurt and it, you get hurt and you're like, I don't know, like it's not just like, banging my knee, or tripping on something. This is a little bit more serious. Get checked out. Worst case scenario, doctor sees you, says, you know what, you're fine. Go ahead, go home. That's the worst case. $100, out the door. That's a much better situation. And then minimal injuries, even small things, I don't want to get down to the paper cut. Some people say, yes, report a paper cut and, it could, get infected. That's true. You should. That's the proper way. But I'm not personally super worried about paper cuts. Not a lot of fatalities have happened because of paper cuts, but pretty much anything beyond that, get it checked out. Don't be afraid to of reputation loss or anything by getting checked out. Serious incidents, as I mentioned before, everyone's got to go to the muster point, head counts taken, make sure everyone's there, make sure everyone's been contacted appropriately, arrange transport of medical, transport to any, hospitals or clinics that people need to go to. And then if you're qualified, perform rescue to get someone out and have the appropriate equipment. If you don't have the appropriate equipment, performing rescue is not a good situation. That puts everybody at risk because now they have more than just the one person to rescue. So we don't want to put anybody into a worse position. So only if you're qualified and have the right equipment. Scene preservation. This happens often where people move things. I don't necessarily think it's to cover up what happened, but that's always kind of in the back of your head. But more so, they just try to get things back to normal or cleaned up, or so that somebody else doesn't get hurt. To some extent, that's okay, but by and large, you want to leave everything alone so that when it's investigated, that we can determine what actually, like, this was actually what was happening. This is where everything was when the person got hurt. When we don't do that, we just allow for the opportunity for it to happen again because we don't actually know where things were and how things were when the incident happened. So if you move stuff around after an accident, maybe to cover it up, maybe just to, as I mentioned, kind of put things back the way they should be, yada, yada, you are increasing the likelihood that another one of your friends is going to get hurt in the future. So leave the incident alone so people can, do their job. So leave things alone. If it must be moved, which does happen, take photographs. Hey, this has got to get moved. We can't leave this here. It's going to create greater danger. Fine, take a photo. Cordon off any sensitive areas, prevent people from walking in. Assess everyone, medically, psychologically, etc. And then, during this phase, you don't have to know the root causes. We're not at that phase yet. Getting witness statements is something a lot of people don't talk about in this training, but I definitely like to have a little brief session on it. If you're providing a witness statement or asking for a witness statement, be as thorough as possible. You may not have the best spelling or handwriting. That's okay. Have someone else copy down your statement. That's perfectly normal and candidly, even preferred sometimes. So you can just kind of talk and let them document. You don't have to worry about writing it out properly. So be as clear and concise as you can, be as thorough as you can, and again, try to assess those 5 W's: who, what, where, when, why, as much as you can in that witness statement. Now, on the why, you may not know why. Don't feel like you have to figure out why. Be like, I have no idea why. I knew Billy was hurt. I was on this side of the location. I didn't see it. That's fine. You don't have to say that you saw it if you didn't, but write down what you were doing. I was fitting this pipe together. I was leveling out this dirt over here. I heard something. I turned around. People were gathered around a guy. I walked over. Be as thorough as you can about what your experience was during that incident. No speculation. We don't need, I think it's because he was, having wife problems. We don't need the opinions. We need facts in those instances. Investigation strategies from our end, just so you know, give you kind of a brief walkthrough on that side of the house. So we're going to look at 4 things typically right away. Did the company or you have procedures, and were they followed? Were the people trained to the procedures? Did they know the training? Did they fail the test when they took it? Or what training did they have? What were the environmental conditions? Was there ice? Was there wind? Was it dark? Was the ground uneven? Things of that nature. And then lastly, equipment. What tools were they using? Were they designed for that purpose? Were they clipped in properly? Were they placed where they should have been placed, etc.? So we kind of look at those different areas kind of right off the bat. And then, lastly, historical precedents. I kind of went through these other ones. How many times has this happened before? Is this something we just kind of accepted because it was just a near miss and no one ever actually got hurt? Industry-wide, are there a lot of these instances that occur? And if you look up the OSHA fatality, in fact, I'm going to put a link for that in the training here. Just, take 2 seconds and look through it. I'm not going to quiz you on it, but just take 2 seconds, click the link. I'll just put in OSHA, fatality report. A lot of the times people get hurt, it's by the same thing. Like if you look over the past 6 months, and it's a little bit, behind the time, so it may only be up to March or April right now. But if you look at the last 6 months of fatalities in the United States at work, it's a lot of the same stuff. Billy fell. This, Johnny got crushed. This person fell. That person got crushed. This person got caught in between. That person was hit by this. It's the same stuff over and over again. And you look at it, and if you click through, and I know I'm kind of a nerd safety guy, I read through those things. You see, you're like, man, I think that one could have been avoided had he taken the WCS, or worst case scenario principle. One guy this year died from resurfacing a bathtub in an apartment building. So they gave him some chemicals, goes into this bathroom, enclosed space, not wearing a respirator, dumps the chemicals in the tub, starts smearing them around, dies. I think he was a little bit older. Regardless. Now, could that individual have read the labels and where it says wear a respirator? And I looked at the chemicals, and you can actually read them in the report. It says highly toxic. Do not have it in enclosed spaces. Ensure proper ventilation. Ensure respiratory equipment. Blah blah blah. If he'd have read that label and said, hey, what's the worst thing that could happen to me while doing this job? And even if it's something stupid like putting a liner, lining a bathtub. Something kind of, I don't know who really relines a bath or resurfaces bathtubs. Maybe that's normal. I've never done it. Just buy a new bathtub. But anyway, so, maybe it's something simple like that. Just thinking, what could go wrong here? Let me just go ahead. Maybe this chemical's bad for me. Let me just go ahead and read the chemical label or the SDS on it. And it's going to tell you this will kill you. And then hopefully that adjusts your decision making or your planning for that job. And I'm not trying to make light of the situation because a worker died. I'm just saying that historically, a lot of people that die from doing the same kind of thing, and the lesson's been learned so many times that we should always be taking those instances into account. We know people have gotten hurt doing this job before. Okay, we definitely want to take the time to do what we can to prevent it from happening. So reporting. Reports, once the accident is done and we've investigated, we know what's going on. Reports, if you are responsible to write a report or be involved with a report, they should be concise. They don't need to be super lengthy or wordy. They should be thorough at the same time, meaning that all the relevant facts and data are in the report. Clarifying those 5 W's: who, what, where, when, why. Assign corrective action. And then most important, I don't want to say most importantly, but equally as importantly, avoid assigning blame. This happens a lot, and for me as a safety guy, once someone's out there and they're trying to tell me, it's this guy's fault, he wasn't paying attention, he's an idiot, we shouldn't have hired him, we should have fired him 2 months ago, I start to get suspicious because I'm like, wait a second, Billy didn't come to work today thinking I'm going to get myself hurt. That didn't happen. Certain scenarios came into play that ultimately resulted in this person getting hurt. But it's probably not just Billy. Sometimes it is. Don't get me wrong. We've seen instances where individuals completely rogue act on their own volition against company procedures, against their training, against what their supervisors told them to do, and they do something ridiculous that gets themselves hurt. Happens. But I would say it's probably 2% of the time. Very commonly, individuals making rogue decisions is not the reason. It's people that are doing what they've always done and as a part of a team, and everyone's watched them do it before. And this time, for whatever reason, the stars lined up, Murphy's Law came into effect, and they got hurt. So avoid assigning blame. That's not the purpose of these. And that's another reason why people are kind of hesitant to report or say things when they happen. They don't want to get blamed for stuff. A good program doesn't assign blame. They assign, preventative measures. They're like, hey, this is what we're going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again. Also, if you're a safety person, listen to this. My encouragement is not just to find more paperwork to throw on top of the pile to prevent it. Yes, writing this stuff down does help, but typically people, communicating more effectively adds a lot more value than checking more boxes on a piece of paper. Not that I'm against the boxes on the piece of paper, but if I had to choose one or the other, I would choose effective communication every time, especially from qualified people. And that also can be a breakdown where the most trained people either aren't doing the job or haven't properly trained someone else how to do the job. All right. Moving into our next topic, hearing conservation. This is, something that can cause an accident. The difference between this accident and a lot of the incidents that I've discussed so far is those ones are pretty acute, meaning like immediate boom, this problem, and someone's hurt and Johnny's down and we got to get him to the hospital. Those are kind of the worst case scenarios. These, hearing conservation, the loss of hearing happens every day to everybody. The older you get, you're going to lose hearing, and I've got a chart in here to kind of show you that. But ultimately, we do things at work that slowly degrades our hearing more quickly. And my goal is to give us some tips to make sure we keep that hearing as long as possible, so you can enjoy your grandkids' laughs, and you don't have to be that grandpa who's like, what? I had no idea what you're saying. That was my grandpa. Eventually he get it, and then hearing aids and everything. But for a lot of years he just kind of listened to ringing and kind of the wah 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 kind of thing. And you don't want to be that guy. So frac sites, if you've ever worked on or around a frac site, you know about it. And it's not uncommon for everyone around a frac site to kind of be wearing the earmuffs, but definitely high noise areas. Also production facilities, LAC units, pumps, etc. They can be loud and be above 85 decibels. Even inside of a treater, if you got that thing screaming on a barn burner well, it can be above 85 decibels. Pumps and trucks also, as I mentioned, they can have loud noises that ultimately cause hearing damage over time. Not immediately, not like a bull plug hitting you from a pressurized casing open valve, but over time it can cause damage. So inevitably this is going to happen anyway. But loud noises, even not extremely loud noises, but overly loud noises over a short period of time can damage hearing. So I want to point out this picture in this slide here. We got our little Mini X there. So you'll see behind the Mini X where he's driven, he has damaged that grass, and that's going to be damaged for a long time. It looks like it might grow back, just one trip across it, maybe not the end of the world. He's on a mat there. That's a good idea, protect that grass. But if you were to drive on that every single day, for 20 years, what's the condition of that grass going to be? I don't even think it would take 20 years, probably 3 days. And that grass where he's driven is going to be dead forever. The nerves are like fibers in our inner ear. And they, the way essentially they work is sound hits them and they vibrate and, send a signal to the brain. But they get damaged over time. They kind of, no matter what, they get damaged over time. But as you get exposed to louder noises, they get damaged quicker. And just like a Mini X running over something, it's going to damage a lot faster than a footfall would. But even feet, walking across grass, will kill that grass over time. So the nerves on your inner ear are very similar. So it does. Here's kind of the chart I mentioned. As you get older, even at 30 years old, you're going to lose about 1% of your hearing. Up to 40, another 2%. 40 to 50, 4%. 50 to 60, 11%. And then 60 to 70, 25%. Not a lot of data past that, but by the time you're 70, you should expect to have 25% hearing loss if you just lived normal. You never had headphones. You never went to a rock concert. You didn't shoot guns. You didn't work around heavy equipment. You didn't do any of that. By the time you're 70, you're going to have 3/4 of your hearing, no matter what you do. So just imagine adding to that, working around heavy equipment, pumps, trucks, frac sites, drill sites, generators, Fruhofs, whatever it is, over time, lots of rock concerts, lots of shooting without hearing protection, you're going to have issues. So here's kind of a decibel rating by type of equipment. So, breathing, really low, does produce some sound. Rustling leaves. Refrigerator is about 40 decibels, which I was kind of surprised by, but mine must operate a little bit quieter, or my hearing's so bad I just don't hear it. Rainfall, conversations, about 60 decibels. That's kind of where I'm talking at right now. Now, when I get going and I've measured myself, I can get up there to not 100 decibels, 80, 90, 100 if I'm like really pumping it out there. Try not to do that, but it can happen. Helicopters, hair dryers, trucks at about 80 decibels. So really a truck is just, and if you've ridden in a car for a long time or a truck, you know this, your ears kind of start to ring a little bit, is just under that dangerous level. Even car city traffic is about 70 decibels. So you get up there 90, 100, 110, 120, 130, 140 decibels. And gunshots are in that 140 decibels as well. I don't know why they put fireworks. Probably wasn't from North Dakota area. Gunshots, 140 decibels. That's the threshold of pain and permanent damage. You get hit there, and just look, from 0 to, I can't even read that number. 10, Google. It's a lot of zeros. That's going to permanently damage your hearing. So make sure you get earplugs, etc. So basically, not all of us are carrying around an audiometer in our pocket. We are. It's a cell phone. You can get the app, but we don't usually have that app open. Like, what's my decibel, atmospheric rating? We're not usually looking at that. But if you have to shout to be heard within 2 feet of distance, you need hearing protection at that point. So that's kind of like the tribal way to know. But ultimately, you can have the app on your phone. It's free. You can pay more and record and watch the graphs and things, but it is free to just determine what the level is. Up to 100 decibels. That's as high as they typically go on the phone. So this is kind of the cutout of the anatomy of an ear. You have the pinna, the eardrum, the middle ear, and then right in here, this inner ear, and between that middle ear and inner ear, you see the little bone right there. That vibrates, and then all the nerves in there also vibrate. Those are what get damaged, and as you can see, that's a very small little bone there. So it doesn't take a whole lot to shatter that. I mean, if you had a kind of a subwoofer situation in your vehicle when you were young, you know that it vibrates and moves stuff around, and things can fall off tables. I mean, if you're doing it right with the subwoofers. But all this stuff can get damaged in there pretty good, and ultimately once it's damaged, you're talking about implants and all kinds of things to fix that. So gradual, this is kind of what I mentioned earlier. It's gradual hearing loss. No matter what, it's gradual, but sometimes we just overlook it. We don't think about it actually affecting us. Or like, oh, my ears were ringing a little bit when I went to sleep last night, no big deal. If you talk to people who've had hearing damage, serious hearing damage, they cannot sleep. They cannot get to sleep because of the ringing in the ears at times. It's so bad. Like, it's just this loud noise. You don't want to be that person. Wear your hearing protection. So overexposure and that ringing is called tinnitus. And again, other things can cause it too. It's not just loud noises. But again, worst case scenario, can we prevent hearing loss from noises in the workplace? Yes, we can. So this is kind of an old system they used as kind of one of the first hearing aids. Definitely not an attractive look, but in Williston, maybe better than some of the people walking around here. No, I'm just joking. I like Williston. I'm from here. But again, the loudness of the decibels and length time exposed, how big your ear cups are, all these things have an impact on, getting hit in the face. And I'm just joking. All right. So, guns are one of the major reasons for hearing loss up here. It's not necessarily in the workplace. So make sure you get hearing protection even when you're shooting. And that's the one thing, I laugh about, whenever I watch a movie and someone's shooting a gun and there's people just standing next to them, like, no big deal. I'm like, nah, bro, like, someone's firing off 10 rounds within 3 feet and you're inside of a room, like, you would not just be like, cool, what are we getting for lunch? Like, you'd be a little messed up, especially grenades too. Like, I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. In fact, we're finding that microwave and sonar, especially high-pitched frequency sonars, are being used as weapons. They can drop people from like a mile away with a high-pitched frequency, high decibel. It's basically a sound cannon. It can knock someone down. So how does it affect your ears, and when do you need to wear hearing protection? Okay. 85 decibels is kind of the magic number. Once we get above 85 for 8 hours, you're going to have hearing damage. That's just in one day. So think about somebody over the lifetime of their job. And the conversation itself is at 60 decibels. Cars are at 70 decibels. Trucks are in the 80 range. So it doesn't take a whole lot of noise. 90 decibels, and then for every 5 decibels increases, the exposure time halves. So from 85 to 90 goes from 8 to 4, 90 to 100, 4 to 1, 100 to 105, 30 minutes, and then obviously 95 was in there at 2, but I just felt like that was pedantic. So 105 to 110, you go from 30 to 15 minutes. At 115 decibels, you need to have hearing protection. In fact, over 100, they want you to have plugs and muffs, and that's kind of our hearing protection model. We have plugs, muffs, and caps. So plugs are good. The nice thing I like about plugs is you can actually get them customized to cancel out certain again, like hertz and different frequencies, and so it would prevent you from hearing a gunshot, but you could hear Johnny talking to you 5 feet away. Those are the kind that I recommend if you're consistently around loud noises. For the rest of us, if it's just kind of intermittent, get some plugs or some muffs if necessary. You can get the muffs that clip on your hard hat. They're pretty cool. Caps are also good. Typically, Caps, they're only going to knock out a couple decibels. They're good for like keeping dust out of your ear, but that's about it. There's really not a whole lot of sound protection there, and I'll tell you how you can know that in a moment. Brief PSA: cotton and cigarette butts, gun, casings do not work. We have a picture in here, one person using a pistol to provide hearing protection with, the pistol end pointed at their head. Don't recommend that one either. So muffs, there's some advantages here. Obviously, they cover the whole ear, once again, preventing dust and other things from getting in. They're durable. You can get these to filter out pitches and different frequencies as well, which is good. And they're easy to clean. They're expensive, they're bulky, and a lot of times they prevent, as far as disadvantages, they prevent you from being able to talk to your coworker. Earplugs, advantages, get them a lot of different materials. There's one size fits all typically. But there are different sizes. Disposable and expensive, lightweight, and then again, is in the example here in this photo, you can get them not only customized for different frequencies, but customized to fit your ears so they're not uncomfortable. For me, I think I have different size ears, so if I wear them for a long time, one ear just hurts a lot, the other one's fine. I don't know what's up with that. Maybe somebody knows. You could write it in the comments. But ultimately, they're custom to your ears and the frequencies you're trying to knock out. So if you work with an audiometric person, say, hey, I'm around 85 decibels, it's a pump or it's a generator, they can make a pair that works well for you. They're about $100. They're not cheap, but if you think about the value of your long-term hearing, $100 versus the cost of a hearing aid, it's probably a lot better of an investment. Disadvantages: they can fall out, and then if you're not cleaning them or reusing ones that aren't designed to be reused, your ears can get infected. So for insertion, proper ear insertion, quick little guide here. Reach over the top of your head with one hand. You pick up on I believe that's the pinna, which is the outside of the ear, the top of the ear. Insert into the ear canal and hold in place for 20 to 30 seconds. Now that's suggested. If it fits in, it fits in. You don't need to hold it there. Canal caps, as I mentioned, only block outside. Really not going to give you a whole lot of protection. 2 to 5 NRR. So that's the number that we use to determine. It's called the noise reduction rating, or how much sound it blocks out. Now, this number is a little bit deceiving. So, for example, here I have a label of a 30, which is typical for your, kind of single-use foam earplugs. 30 means 30 total decibels divided between both ears. So it's actually only 15. I don't know why they do that. It doesn't make sense, but that's the way they decided to do it back in the day. Government, what can you say? So you take your hearing protection. So if it says 30 decibels and you're around 100 decibels, that's only going to bring you down to 85 because you have to split it in half per ear, which is only maximum of 8 hours. So in that case, and that's a lot of the reasons, because these typically don't go a lot higher than 30, the ones that you put in. That's why they recommend the plugs and the muffs so that you actually get protection there. So, it's 15 decibels per ear. Don't know why they do it, but that's what the noise reduction rating is. So above 85, the company needs to provide hearing protection, and the employee needs to wear hearing protection. There is not a waiver for this. It's not like a hepatitis B test or vaccination shot. You actually have to wear your hearing protection. So if it's improperly used or managed, and here's that picture again. That's a gun in his ear. Not a good method. A lot of times the reason we do it is we're just like, I'm just going to go in here for a second. I'm only here for a moment, etc. But that's how damage happens, especially over time. So make sure you always have some in your pocket. For me, that's the easiest way. It sucks if I have to walk across location to go back to my truck to grab the plugs, to walk back to the thing just to talk to the guy for 2 seconds and go back to my truck. It's tempting to just be like, nah, I'm just going to do this real quick and I'll be fine. That's why it's good to just have them. I have a little plastic round plastic thing with a cap, and I just have them in there and typically keep them with my FR. Audiometric testing. So if your employer determines, yes, we have over 85 decibels in enough places, then they're going to want to start an audiometric testing program, which is where they send you in once a year to get tested. You have the right to access this information always, so you can look at what the records say and what your history is, and then over time, basically what they're tracking is, are you having normal hearing loss, or is it increased determine what you're doing. And if you're like, oh yeah, at work I'm fine, but I go home and shoot my 30-06 without hearing protection on, then there's nothing anyone can do for you. So the testing, as we talked about earlier, yearly testing is designed to determine that hearing loss. So yeah, they're going to show if you're losing hearing or not. So lastly, here we have medical personal records. You have the right to have access to these. You can kind of see and track your hearing loss, and then once again, if you're getting higher than average hearing loss, then there may be some compensation for that. But our goal is to prevent that from happening, not to say, hey, I can't hear anything, but I got $20,000 when I'm 70 years old. That $20,000 is not going to matter. So again, thank you very much for tuning in and for June's safety meeting. I hope to see you guys next month. Have a safe month and enjoy yourselves out there in the nice warm weather, and I'll see you in July.